We're going to use H300 triangle paper to make Hey guys, I'm Kimberly Jolly from Fat Quarter Shop, and it's time for Christmas in July. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of these free patterns and free videos. The 2021 Christmas in July is called All the Trimmings. Pick up your quilt kit at Fat Quarter Shop, pick up your free pattern in the description box, and sew along with me each Monday for 5 weeks. And as a bonus, this year we have added a free cross stitch. For all the information on the cross stitch, make sure to subscribe to our Fat Quarter Shop Floss Tube channel, and you'll see all the information there. So let's get started on row 1. To keep myself organized, I've pulled all of the fabrics I need for row 1 and my background fabric. I have starched all of these fabrics because this pattern has enough room for starching. Check out my starching video to know how I do that. I've cut a little 1-inch square and just put it in my book so I can always remember what I used in row 1. I will start with cutting my background fabric. I've put all of my bulk kind of out of the way on the right. I have my fold at the top and my selvage at the very bottom. I'm going to start by doing a straightening cut. And for this row, cut 1 2.5 inch by width of fabric strip. And then we will cut 2 1.5 by width of fabric strips. To do that, I'm first going to cut a 3-inch strip, lining up the line on my ruler with the line on my fabric. I can move this out of the way so that we can use it on row 2. Move my ruler back to the 1.5. And this gives me 1 2.5 inch strip and 2 1.5 inch strips. I'm going to subcut this into 6.5 inch segments. So I'll line up the very top of my ruler. And I'm going to cut 3 6.5 inch segments, and then I'm going to subcut 2 of those. So we need 3 2.5 inch rectangles. So there they are right there. And we need 2 2-inch by 6.5. So I'm going to take these remaining 2 and subcut that down into 2-inch rectangles. So from here, I will put these on my board. I've got 3 2.5 by 6.5 inch rectangles, and I have 2 2-inch by 6.5 inch rectangles that I'm going to label as B. Now for our C's, we need 48 1.5 inch squares. I will just get these strips lined up right on top of each other so that it's perfectly straight here and here. On the end where the selvage is, I'm just going to make sure I get all of that selvage off. And the selvage has little dots on it, so as long as you get all those little dots off, you're fine. I'm going to rotate this gently, just make sure everything stays nice and lined up. And I'm going to subcut into 1.5 inch squares. To do that, I'm going to cut at the 6-inch line, the 4.5 inch line, the 3-inch line, and the 1.5 inch line. And that is how I like to subcut it. It's just quicker for me. So that's going to give me 16 squares. So I'm going to keep doing the same thing all the way across. So that's going to give me 32. And this will give me 48 squares. I'm just going to throw that little piece away, and then I'll stack up all of these squares. So we're going to move to cutting our fabric D. We've got 2 red squares, and from each of the squares we're going to cut 4 3.5 inch squares to get 8 total. I have my 2 red fabrics. I've got them nice and ironed so there's no wrinkles. Just layer them together, and anytime I'm working on this quilt, I'm going to use the Perfect 10 ruler. It's great because it has only the lines for the 1-inch and the 1/2 inch, and that's what you're going to need for this pattern. So I have these nice and lined up, and I'm going to just cut 2 sides at once, just to get a straight line here and a straight line here. And when you use a rotating mat, it's going to keep the fabric from moving. So 3.5 plus 3.5 is 7, and I need 2 3.5-inch squares both directions. So if I put this perfect 10 ruler with a 7-inch here and the 7-inch here, cut 2 sides, this will be enough to just save for scraps for another project. From here, I'll move my ruler to the 3.5-inch line, making sure to line up the top, the side, and the bottom. And then rotate your mat and do the same thing, the 3.5, and line up all the sides. And all of these are going to be your fabric Ds. For the E and the F, we're going to use 4 squares of H300 triangles on a roll paper to make these half square triangles. Now, if you would like to make these the traditional way, just follow the instructions. But what I'm going to do is cut 4 squares of this to start. I like to put a little washi tape to keep the paper down, and just use your Creative Grids ruler and just cut as close to that line as you can get to that solid line, and you need 4 squares. Put your washi tape back on. Take one of your green fabrics and another one of your green fabrics. Put them right sides together. Place your paper on top. I'm going to put pins just on 4 of the sides. Just try to keep your pins away from the dashed lines, because that's where you're going to actually stitch, so you don't want to put your pins in the way of your stitching. And using this triangle paper is going to just save time. And again, if you want to do the traditional method, that is also written in the pattern. From here, I'm just going to cut the sides off in case you want to use that for another project. And we're ready to start assembling this beautiful block. We're going to start with making our berry units, and for this demonstration we're going to make 1 block so that you know how to make all 4 of them. And this block right here, it uses this text print. So we're going to take 2 of the text prints from the fabric D stack, and we're going to add corner squares to all 4 corners. Now I'm going to show you how to add corner squares using washi tape on your sewing machine when we get there. And the reason we're not using a friction pin today is because this is black fabric, and since it is a dark fabric, it will leave a white line that you will not want. Now I'm going to take some fabric C squares. I'm going to put them on each corner. I like to do it this way because it's going to save me time and thread, because we're going to chain piece. And by using pins on each of the squares, you're going to get a more accurate result. So just lay them here, and now what I will do is put the pin in here. I want to make sure this is flush on the bottom and the side, and put the pin. I'm going to put the pin kind of just on the edge so that when I'm sewing a line right here, my pin is not in the way. And I want to do this very carefully so that when I get to my sewing machine, I get a more accurate result. And the way you can tell if it's accurate is from the front, you should not see any red. When you turn this over, you should not see any black. So right here, you can see that little black is kind of poking out. So we need to move this square in a little bit. And just taking this little time to get everything pinned and accurate is going to give you a better result. So just take your time and do this on both of these squares. For this sew along, I'm using Aurifil 2600, which is a light gray. It's a great thread to use when you have a mix of dark and light fabrics, because it's going to blend in well with both. For sewing, I am going to stitch with a 1.8, and that's the stitch length I'm going to use throughout. Now I'm going to show you how to mark your machine bed with washi tape so that you can sew easy corner square triangles without having to mark your fabric. So what I'm going to do is put the needle in the down position. Put a ruler right next to the needle and just make sure it's straight across. Then you'll just take a piece of washi tape. I'm just using washi tape because it will not leave any kind of residue on your machine. And then you will just put that washi tape right against your ruler. And now you have a straight line to follow on the next step. We're going to sew from point to point on all of these corner square triangles. So put this in your sewing machine right at the point, and you're going to use the washi tape as a guide. So as you're sewing, keep the point of this corner square right on that washi tape. And you just want to make sure you stitch from point to point so that when you fold this over, it's going to go all the way to the edge. And we're going to do that on all four on this unit and all four corner squares on this unit. Now we're going to trim a 1/4 inch away from our stitch line on all of these units. I do like to use a ruler when I do this. You could also use scissors, but I do prefer to use a rotary cutter. So just use the line on my ruler, that's a 1/4 inch line, and just trim. You're going to do that on all of these. And for each of the holly blocks, you're going to need 2 of these berry units. And now we will press. I'm going to set my seams by putting my iron on my units. Let it sit for about 5 seconds. And then we're going to press toward the black. And I'll just do each one at a time and count about 5 seconds so that it gets nice and flat. And you can see when you do corner squares, they kind of flip up like this. So I'm going to give you a little tip on how to get them to be nice and flat before we put them into the block. And when you're ironing, just go nice and steady and don't rock your iron too much. So see how those all flip up? We're going to put this clapper on it, and the wood is going to absorb the heat while we keep continuing on with different parts of the block. So the next step is we need to make our half square triangles. When I'm working with half square triangle paper, I'm going to use a 1.5 stitch length. From here, I'm going to also use the same foot, and I'm going to start stitching kind of off of the paper. Stitch on the dashed line as close as you can all the way around, keeping your paper nice and flat as you sew. Once you have all of this stitch, we're going to cut on all of the solid lines. What I prefer to do is cut the 4 outside lines first. And cutting accurately is very important in this step because the more accurate you cut, the more accurate your half square triangles are going to come out. And then from here, we're going to cut this line and this line next. And using a rotating mat is going to really help with this. Pick your ruler up this way, rotate your mat, and nothing has moved. And cut, and then you want to cut these inside lines. You don't have to be as accurate because those are inside the seam allowance. So you can see I'm not being 100% precise on those. Now I did all of the half square triangles for the entire row. So this will be for the first block, second block, third block, and fourth block. I'm only going to show one block today, so I'll set these aside for later. And from here, I'm going to pull the paper off. So the best thing to do is fold the paper back in a nice crease. And I had lowered my stitch length so that when I pull the paper right here, it just comes off really nice. So it should come off nice and clean like that. If it doesn't, lower your stitch length a little bit. So from here, I will set my seam for about 5 seconds. That will just lock your stitches in and make it easier to press the next step. From here, I'm going to press to one side. It doesn't matter which side. So now I'm going to trim these dog ears off at this step. And then we're going to press open. Now you could have pressed open to start, but I find I burn myself. So I prefer to press to one side, let it cool, and then press open. And I'm just gonna finger press across to get it nice and flat and let it just sit about 5 seconds. And then we can move the clapper, and you can see all of this is nice and flat, whereas it wasn't earlier. And then put your clapper on this piece. And the most important thing for the clapper to work is for your piece to still be hot when it goes underneath the wood. When you look on the other side, you want it to be flat, and you don't want it to be kind of puckered like this. So just nice and flat. Just put it under here. We'll let it sit about 1 minute, and then we'll add our corner squares. So from here, we're gonna add fabric C squares to 2 sides. They're gonna be the sides without seams. So not these two, put them on these two. And I will do the same thing where I just place them on there and then pin before I go to the sewing machine, making sure from the front I can't see the green, and from the back I can't see the black. I'm going to move the knob back to a 1.8. We're going to finish up our leaf units by trimming a 1/4 inch away from the seam, just like we did previously. And then we're going to press these units. So set your seams again, and if you lay both units on top of each other, it'll save time because you can do 2 in 1. And then we're going to press toward the green, and when we put our block together, you'll see why we're pressing toward the green. It will make our seams nest. So anytime you get a Fat Quarter Shop pattern or an It's So Emma pattern, you're going to see that we always have arrows, and that helps you nest your seams so you don't have to think about it when you're doing your block. We've already thought about it for you. And once that's nice and hot, put that clapper right on it and just do the other unit the same way. Now we're going to take the 4 units we just made and build our holly block following our pattern. So you want your greens, your dots to go here, and your geometric print to go here. And here you can either have all of your words going the same direction, or you can do them differently. I'll just keep them going the same direction just to make it nice and clean. From here, I'm going to sew down here, press, and then we're going to sew across. But to start, I always pin before I go to my sewing machine. So I'll put these right sides together, and we're going to pin. So first I'm going to change away from this open toe foot to my 1/4 inch foot. I like to use a 1/4 inch foot that has a guide so that when I'm sewing I can put my fabric right up next to the guide. From here, set your seams and don't rush too much because you are getting to the end of the block, but pressing is super important. And from here I'm going to press toward the green, and I'm going to keep this chain here. So I'll finger press first and put the tip of my iron right on that seam. And you can see that because we pinned, that seam right there nests. Do the same thing on the other side toward the green. And then from here, we need to sew across here. And you can see that this little leaf edge needs to touch that little leaf edge. This seam needs to nest, and this seam needs to nest. First, I'm going to clip my seam, put the fabric's right sides together, and I'm going to pin on the right side to start, and then I'm going to pin on the left side so that it's got a base to go with. And then from here, I'm going to do what I call poke a pin, because I want this little green notch to hit that little green notch. So poke your pin right in the point of the little green tip right there, right at the very point. And then put your pin back in the point of this one, right in the tip. Put your pin where it's just straight up and down, and just press it with your fingers, and then poke that pin right back in, and hopefully that pin will stay in place and your point will stay in place. The same thing over here. You're gonna just slide these two together and you can feel it. And then here, this one doesn't need to meet anything, so just put a pin. And then over here, this needs to nest, so you will just glide that over and let it hit the notch. You'll feel it. Put a pin here and just put a pin here, and we're going to use that same 1/4 inch foot and a 1/4 inch seam and just go straight down here. So we'll do the final press on this block that we've made. You're going to make all of your blocks the same exact way. On this last step, it really doesn't matter which direction you press. Either way is fine. Just let it sit right there. Let the clapper sit on it about a minute or two, and we're going to trim just the outside of the block to get it nice and clean. So from here, you just want to make sure that all your little points match. So like right here, it's nice and even. So from here, I like to trim my block. Just use a ruler and put it right on the edge, and we're just going to trim. You can see that this side is even and this side isn't, and it's all going to work out because when you lay your sashing down, it'll be hidden in the seam, so it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. And I just trimmed the edges off so I would just have less mess in my seams and less threads hanging off. So from here, you're going to complete 3 more blocks using the same exact techniques and then lay this out on your cutting table. Your fabric B's are going to go on the edge, and your 3 fabric A's are going to go between the blocks, and you just want to pay attention to the layout of the berry and the leaves, and then you're just going to pin all of this together, sew with a 1/4 inch seam, and press toward your sashing, and row 1 will be done. That's a gift wrap on row 1. Come back next Monday and join me for all the trimmings part 2, and join me every Friday, 9 a.m. Central Time for my Friday live stream. See you there.